The South Downs are a range of chalk hills that extends for about 260 square miles across the southeastern coastal counties of England, from the Itchen Valley of Hampshire in the west to Beachy Head, near Eastbourne, East Sussex, in the east. It is bounded on its northern side by a steep escarpment, from whose crest there are extensive views northwards across the Weald. The South Downs National Park forms a much larger area than the chalk range of the South Downs and includes large parts of the Weald. The South Downs are characterised by rolling chalk downland with close-cropped turf and dry valleys, and are recognised as one of the most important chalk landscapes in England. The range is one of the four main areas of chalk downland in southern England. The South Downs are relatively unpopulated compared to southeast England as a whole, although in Sussex there has been large-scale urban encroachment onto the chalk downland by major seaside resorts, including most notably Brighton and Hove. The South Downs have been inhabited since ancient times, and at periods the area has supported a large population, particularly during Romano-British times. There is a rich heritage of historical features and archaeological remains, including defensive sites, burial mounds and field boundaries. Within the South Downs environmentally sensitive area there are 37 sites of special scientific interest, including large areas of chalk grassland. The grazing of sheep on the thin, well-drained chalk soils of the Downs over many centuries and browsing by rabbits resulted in the fine, short, springy turf, known as Old Chalk Grassland, that has come to epitomize the South Downs today. Until the middle of the 20th century, an agricultural system operated by downland farmers known as sheep and corn farming underpinned this. The sheep of villages would be systematically confined to certain cornfields to improve their fertility with their droppings, and then they would be let out onto the downland to graze. However, starting in 1940 with government measures during World War II to increase domestic food production and continuing into the 1950s, much grassland was ploughed up for arable farming, fundamentally changing the landscape and ecology, with the loss of much biodiversity. As a result, while Old Chalk Grassland accounted for 40 to 50% of the Eastern Downs before the war, only 3 to 4% survives. This and development pressures from the surrounding population centres ultimately led to the decision to create the South Downs National Park, which came into full operation on 1 April 2011, to protect and restore the Downs. The South Downs have also been designated as a National Character Area by Natural England. It is bordered by the Hampshire Downs, the Weald and Greensand, the Low Weald and the Pevensey Levels to the north, and the South Hampshire Lowlands and South Coast Plain to the south. The Downland is an extremely popular recreational destination, particularly for walkers, horse riders and mountain bikers. A long-distance footpath and bridleway, the South Downs Way, follows the entire length of the chalk ridge from Winchester to Eastbourne, complemented by many interconnecting public footpaths and bridleways. Toponymy. The term Downs is from Old English duns, meaning hill. The word acquired the sense of elevated rolling grassland around the 14th century. These hills are prefixed south to distinguish them from another chalk escarpment, the North Downs, which runs roughly parallel to them about 30 miles away on the northern edge of the Weald. Geology. The South Downs are formed from a thick band of chalk which was deposited during the Cretaceous period around 60 million years ago within a shallow sea which extended across much of northwest Europe. The rock is composed of the microscopic skeletons of plankton, which lived in the sea, hence its color. The chalk has many fossils, and bands of flint occur throughout the formation. The chalk is divided into the lower, middle and upper chalk. A thin band of cream-colored nodular chalk known as the Melbourne rock marking the boundary between the lower and middle units. The strata of southeast England, including the chalk, were gently folded during a phase of the alpine orogeny to produce the Weald Artois anticline, a dome-like structure with a long east-west axis. Erosion has removed the central part of the dome, leaving the north-facing escarpment of the South Downs along its southern margin, with the south-facing chalk escarpment of the North Downs as its counterpart on the northern side, as shown on the diagram. Between these two escarpments the anticline has been subject to differential erosion, so that geologically distinct areas of hills and vales lie in roughly concentric circles towards the center. These comprise the Greensand Ridge, most prominent on the north side of the Weald, where it includes Leith Hill, the highest hill in southeast England, the low-lying clay vales of the Low Weald, formed of less resistant Weald clay, and finally the more highly resistant sandstones of the High Weald at the center of the anticline, whose elevated forest ridge includes most notably Ashdown Forest. The chalk, being porous, allows water to soak through. As a result, there are many winterbournes along the northern edge. Geography. The South Downs are a long chalk escarpment that stretches for over 70 miles, rising from the valley of the River Itchen near Winchester, Hampshire, in the west to Beachy Head near Eastbourne, East Sussex, in the east. Behind the steep north-facing scarp slope, the gently inclined dip-slope of undulating chalk downland extends for a distance of up to 7 miles southwards, viewed from high points further north in the High Weald and on the North Downs. The scarp of the South Downs presents itself as a steep wall that bounds the horizon, with its grassland heights punctuated with clumps of trees. In the west, the chalk ridge of the South Downs merges with the North Downs to form the Hampshire Downs. In the east, the escarpment terminates at the English Channel coast between Seaford and Eastbourne, where it produces the spectacular white cliffs of Seaford Head, the cross-section of dry valleys known as the Seven Sisters, and Beachy Head, the highest chalk sea cliff in Britain at 162 metres above sea level. The South Downs may be said to have three main component parts: the East Hampshire Downs, the Western Downs and the Eastern Downs, together with the river valleys that cut across them and the land immediately below them, the scarp foot. The Western and Eastern Downs are often collectively referred to as the Sussex Downs. The Western Downs, lying west of the River Arun, are much more wooded, particularly on the scarp face, than the Eastern Downs. The bare Eastern Downs, the only part of the chalk escarpment to which, until the late 19th century, the term South Downs was usually applied, have come to epitomize, in literature and art, the South Downs as a whole, and which have been the subject matter of such celebrated writers and artists as Rudyard Kipling and Eric Ravilius. Four river valleys cut through the South Downs, namely those of the rivers Arun, Arder, Ouse and Cuckmere, providing a contrasting landscape. Chalk aquifers and to a lesser extent winterbourne streams supply much of the water required by the surrounding settlements. Dew ponds, artificial ponds for watering livestock, are a characteristic feature on the downland. The highest point on the South Downs is Butser Hill, whose summit is 270 metres above sea level. The plateau-like top of this vast, irregularly shaped hill, which lies just south of Petersfield, Hampshire, was in regular use through prehistory. It has been designated as a National Nature Reserve, within the boundary of the South Downs National Park, which includes parts of the Western Weald to the north of the South Downs. The highest point is Black Down, West Sussex, which rises to 280 metres above sea level. However, Black Down geologically is not part of the South Downs but instead forms part of the Greensand Ridge on the Weald's western margins. A list of those points on the South Downs above 700 feet, going from west to east, is given below. History. Archaeological evidence has revealed that the Downs have been inhabited and utilized for thousands of years. Neolithic flint mines such as Sisbury, burial mounds such as the Devil's Jumps and Devil's Humps, and hill forts like Chanctonbury Ring are strong features in the landscape. It has been estimated that the tree cover of the Downs was cleared over 3,000 years ago, and the present closely grazed turf is the result of continual grazing by sheep. National Park. Proposals to create a national park for the South Downs date back to the 1940s. However, it was not until 1999 that the idea received firm government support. After a public inquiry that took place between 2003 and 2009, the government announced its decision to make the South Downs a national park on 31 March 2009. The South Downs National Park finally came into operation on 1 April 2011. Within its boundary are included not only the South Downs proper but also part of the Western Weald, a geologically and ecologically quite different district. The South Downs National Park has replaced two areas of outstanding natural beauty: East Hampshire AONB and Sussex Downs ANB. During the inquiry process, a number of boundary questions were considered, so that the national park contains areas not in the former ANBs, and vice versa. National Nature Reserves. The South Downs contain a number of national nature reserves. The NNRs on the Sussex Downs comprise Kingley Vale, near Chichester, said by Natural England to contain one of the finest yew forests in Europe, including a grove of ancient trees which are among the oldest living things in Britain. Castle Hill, between Brighton and Lewes, an important example of ancient, traditionally managed grassland. Lewes Downs, a traditionally managed chalk downland, and Lullington Heath, on the northern fringe of Friston Forest northwest of Eastbourne, one of the largest areas of chalk heath in Britain. The NNRs on the East Hampshire Downs comprise Butser Hill, near Petersfield, a large area of chalk grassland on the highest point in the South Downs; Old Winchester Hill, a lowland grassland on the west and south-facing scarp slopes of the Meon Valley; and Beacon Hill, a high-quality chalk grassland 5 kilometers west of Old Winchester Hill. Tourism, leisure and sport. In 1923 the Society of Sussex Downsmen was formed with the aim of protecting the area's unique landscape. The South Downs are a popular area for ramblers with a network of over 2,000 miles of well-managed, well-signed and easily accessible trails. The principal bridleway, and longest of them, is the South Downs Way. The Monarch's Way, having originated at Worcester, crosses the South Downs and ends at Shoreham by Sea. Sports undertaken on the Downs include paragliding, mountain biking, horse riding and walking. The popular Beachy Head Marathon, a hilly cross-country marathon, takes place each autumn on the Eastern Downs, starting and finishing in Eastbourne. The South Downs Trail Marathon starts in the village of Slindon and ends at the Queen Elizabeth Country Park. Longer events that take in the South Downs Way include a 100-mile running, ultramarathon, and mountain biking 75-mile nighttime race from Beachy Head to Queen Elizabeth Country Park. Landmarks. Two of the landmarks on the Downs are the Long Man of Wilmington, a chalk-carved figure, and Clayton Windmills. There is also a war memorial, the Chatra, dedicated to Indian soldiers who died in the Brighton area, having been brought there for treatment after being injured fighting on the Western Front in the First World War. South Downs in literature. Rudyard Kipling, who lived at Rottingdean, described the South Downs as "our blunt, bow-headed whale-backed downs." Writing in 1920 in his poem The South Country, poet Hilaire Belloc describes the South Downs as "the great hills of the South Country." In On the South Coast, poet Algernon Charles Swinburne describes the South Downs as "the green, smooth, swelling, unending downs." The naturalist writer William Henry Hudson wrote that, during the whole 53-mile length from Beachy Head to Harting, the ground never rises above a height of 850 feet. But we feel on top of the world. Poet Francis William Bourdillon also wrote a poem on the South Downs. The South Downs have been home to several writers including Jane Austen, who lived at Chawton on the edge of the Downs in Hampshire. The Bloomsbury Group often visited Monk's House in Rodmell, the home of Virginia Woolf in the Ouse Valley. Alfred, Lord Tennyson had a second home at Aldworth, on Blackdown, geologically part of the Weald. Blackdown lies north of the South Downs but is included in the South Downs National Park. In the introduction to Arthur Conan Doyle's short story collection, His Last Beau, Dr. Watson states that Sherlock Holmes has retired to a small farm upon the Downs near Eastbourne. In His Last Beau itself, Holmes states that he lives and keeps bees upon the South Downs. Furthermore, the short story, The Lion's Mane, is about a case which Holmes solves whilst living there. The author Graham Greene's first published novel, The Man Within, is set largely on and around the South Downs. The book's principal character, Andrews, travels by foot across the Downs to reach Lewis and attend the assizes. Greene provides a detailed description of both the landscape and its feel. Gallery. Looking east along the Downs towards the Devil's Dyke, Sussex. South Downs close to Beachy Head. Trig Point on Kithurst Hill, West Sussex. Located on the South Downs way above the village of Storrington. 699 feet high at the summit.